Welcome back. You're watching DXB today, and we are talking about the standard of living in the UAE that keeps on improving and the people who are working behind the scenes to make all the magic happen. Now, our next guest is a strategic urban planner, advisor and researcher in the city Design Placemaking, a human-centric solutions. Basically, she creates cities. Welcome, Fatma Al Khayat, to the show. Wow, you built cities. That must be such a powerful position to be in. Can you explain a little bit more about what a human-centric city is?
Of course. First, I want to thank you so much for having me on the show. It's always such a pleasure to be talking about livable cities, especially in the context of the UAE and the region. I think it's a growing conversation. But a human-centric city ultimately means a city that responds to human needs. And we're talking about human needs and human well-being at many different levels. So we're talking about it from an emotional perspective, from a physical perspective, from a social perspective, even economical perspective. But when we look at it from an urban planning perspective, there are many different things to take into consideration, in fact. And to be able to actually cultivate a city that is human-centric, we need to look into promoting accessibility. And what we mean by accessibility is having access to local needs within a short walking distance or public transit, right? And when we talk about these necessities, I'm talking about being in proximity to schools, to jobs, to public necessities like grocery shopping and pharmacies. We look at other aspects like diversification, and what we mean by that is introducing or promoting different housing mixes, accessibility to public spaces, promoting areas that would create job solutions and job creation. And that is all to reflect back or to respond back to different cultures, to different social incomes, to different cultures. Other aspects that we look at in terms of promoting human-centric cities is connectivity. And I think this is a really, really important aspect to look at, especially in the context of the UAE, is because we're really needing to look into diversifying our transportation modes and moving away from being a car-centric city. And what we mean by that is exploring different modes of transport. That could be public transportation, pedestrianizing streets, introducing cycling networks, but it's also being very conscious in terms of how we plan out these networks. So it's not just enough to introduce these as initiatives, but it's also understanding that we need to apply the first mile and last mile transit. And what we mean by that is moving from point A to point B with ease, right? Because it's not enough just having a public transportation, but it's also important to take into consideration whether it connects to the urban fabric. And the last point that I'd like to raise, which is a really important one and I think is very vital to mention, is creating a sense of belonging. And what we mean by that is when a city truly reflects the identity of the people, so that people can actually participate and feel like they are a part of the city. So human-centric cities, livability is not about infrastructure, but it's about designing spaces or cities where people can actually thrive.
In terms of currently, like the way Dubai is, or the whole GCC, the way they're like a fast pace, the way they're building new, basically new urban areas coming up very quickly. How close do you work with government authorities in terms of advising, in terms of like working closely with them to tell them what the city is required?
I work very, very closely with them. In fact, the last couple of years, I've had the privilege to work very closely with the Abu Dhabi government, and very closely to leadership as well. And honestly, it's been a pleasure working with them because they are very, very, their mentality is set in the right way, and they're very open to innovation in the right way, and they're actually open to listening, to understanding what is it that we need to implement in terms of creating cities that are resilient and that will withstand, the forces of change in the long run.
Well, I'm wondering about the UAE is so futuristic, but we also have this beautiful culture here, and obviously we don't want to lose touch of that. How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, that's a really, it's an interesting question. And I think Dubai has an interesting opportunity here to build a new model where they're integrating building a futuristic city while still remaining deeply rooted. And we don't have to be fixated in terms of applying these futuristic elements in just from a aesthetic and from a building perspective, but we can start to actually introduce it from more subtle ways and more from a cultural and street level. And what I mean by that is promoting the Emirati culture in the way we design public spaces. So for example, introducing or incorporating Majlis-like seating zones or seating areas in public spaces, or creating zones that are gender sensitive, or even incorporating, so from an architectural perspective, climate responsive design. And what we mean by that is implementing design typologies or design strategies that would reduce the outdoor temperature. And what's interesting is that we actually take inspiration from historical and vernacular architecture that already exist here. So through these different strategies and initiatives, we're actually introducing and still embedding culture while still being futuristic and being under the light of innovation.
Oh, I love that.
Fatma, I'm so happy you're here because my mum's a transport planner.
Oh,
She's
yeah?
passionate about it. I've got a big interest in civil engineering and transport planning cities. And I want to ask because the UAE is interesting.
I have to pause you there. I'm not a transport.
I know you're
I
not.
would work
It's part of
collaboratively
it.
with your mother, but we come from different disciplines, but we'll be working
It is
very
a big
closely.
part of it.
Yeah,
and
of
that's
course.
the thing. In the UAE is a young country.
Yes.
It's just over 50 years old. All of these technologies existed when the city first arose. So we ended up with lots of big highways. Now we're moving towards we want more walkable cities. We want third spaces where we can actually run into our neighbors and our local merchants and vendors. Is there a challenge there when it comes to switching almost or trying to integrate walkable cities into these almost segmented areas that are cut up by highways?
It is definitely a challenge, especially with the influx of infrastructure, road and highway infrastructure that already exists. But a challenge is always good for us as urban planners because that means that we're able to think about what the solution could be. And there's always potential to improve our existing neighborhoods to make them more walkable. And what's amazing is that we now have the Dubai 2040 Urban Master Plan in place, which promotes walkable, compact, 20-minute cities, right? So it's also going to help and allow developers and planning authorities to actually implement the right kind of strategies when it comes to walkability. But it's not just enough to just talk about it as a buzzword, but it's also important to understand how we can actually measure, how can we actually, what kind of strategies do we need to put in place to actually promote walkability. And another big question is also our climate. But again, we have many different kinds of strategies in place that we can implement. And one of them being, starting with existing neighborhoods, is introducing shared street networks. So actually converting our existing road networks into shared street networks, which is split between pedestrianized pathways, cycling paths, lanes dedicated to micromobility, and then also having dedicated lanes to cars. But it's like, we call it a road diet, and it's giving more way now to pedestrians. So yes, it is a challenge, but is it achievable? It definitely is.
I'm loving these buzzwords.
Yeah,
Road diet.
Road diet, yeah. We
I
have to come up with these catchy words so that they stick.
And they have, and we wish we could talk to you for longer, at least I do anyway. Love talking about this stuff.